Do we think maybe this is too much of a dichotomy, and it's partly a product of the way that Lucas released them, because you get what you're expecting. If you watch it in the order it was released, you get what you're expecting, and you get completely subverted. Whereas when you look at these underlying tensions that we're talking about in the original three, um, it's there. Like the gray is still very much there, and the good guy bad guy dynamic, it's more pronounced, but it's not as pronounced as you may think it is initially.
Well, that's a big theme in Star Wars. We have to admit that the Jedi are imperfect. They have moments of confliction, and that's brought out more so in the prequels, which is why sometimes I think people have a hard time, especially people who are fans of superhero movies, have a tough time getting on board with this because the Jedi are so conflicted. They're not they're very powerful, but at the end of the day, there's an element to Jedi holding themselves back and not being as powerful as they could be because of how conflicted they are. I mean, just Force lightning as an example. Jedi don't have Force lightning, and I think the reason for that is because they don't want to train people to use it for evil like all the Sith do.
And I think there are definite things that I would think are deliberate parallels that Lucas wrote in between the first half and the second half, such as one we've kind of talked about a little before, which is one that seems kind of trivial, but it's actually quite significant symbolically that I thought of recently was Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end of episode 3. Both, that Anakin almost dies because of the dynamics of their force jumping. And then what's the first trick that Luke plays on Vader? It's a force jump. And I think Lucas probably did that deliberately.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I did not even think about it that way, but looking back on episode 5 and seeing how Vader was both dueling with Luke, but observing what Luke had learned and almost being in awe of it, saying, "I'm impressed by this." It's like it's the confliction of being a proud dad while also being Darth Vader, being the villain, being on one side of a lightsaber battle.
Well, and also Vader slash Anakin never really did resolve that tension that developed, that you see from all the way back in episode 2 between him and his master. And I think that line when he tells Luke, Obi-Wan has trained you well, I think you can still see some of that resentment in Vader, that even now that he's been absorbed into the Force, he's still the master.
Well, I think too, like I was mentioning before about the ambitiousness of Anakin and Luke that we see and we relate to. Anakin wants all the answers right away. He wants to be this all-powerful Jedi right away. And he resents Obi-Wan because he views Obi-Wan as an obstacle. This is played out in numerous lines when he's mourning the death of his mother and he's blaming Obi-Wan for holding him back and not making him powerful enough to save her. We see it when in episode 4 when Obi-Wan and Vader match eyes and Vader's so quick to say the circuit is now complete. When I left you, I was learned. Now I'm the master. He's got this constant need to be the best and best everyone. And that's probably because Qui-Gon was gassing him up in episode 1 as this all-powerful Jedi, and he knew that he was being brought up to be this, but he can't stand the fact that he's not that guy yet.
And I mean, you even see it in little ways. There's 2 ways, I think, to interpret Vader's force choke moments, and they might both be true as a character moment. One of them I've heard is that it's deliberate violence. It's done strategically to make a point and to instill fear in his subordinates and establish his authority. I think that is true, but I think also in that moment when these sort of secularized imperial officers are doubting, that his unique position as the leader, as sort of the second in command of the empire, that there's almost tension between, and it's almost like today when you have tension between the president and the executive on the one hand and the military on the other, and they the military clearly resents this person they kind of think to be sort of a relic and even a clown show that gets to boss them around because the emperor says so. And they have this moment where they're like, "Oh, Vader, I mean, your religion is just stupid and foolish," and he has that resentment. He thinks he's the all powerful leader, and that self conception has been challenged. He lashes out, but not like he did in the prequels, where he was still basically out of control. Now he's learned to harness that energy and tame it a bit.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple reasons for that and why it's played out the way it is. One of them is that he's wearing a mask and it's hard to see his emotions. You don't see his emotions like you do in the prequels, how you're seeing Anakin shed tears and get emotional and get louder with his words. That's one reason why it's that way. And also, by the time he's Vader, he's basically lost everything. He's lost Padme, his two children. They don't know who their father is, and he's just running this all powerful evil empire. And really, all he's running on is that ego that he's had from the very beginning of wanting to be the best.
And so I think we're seeing examples here of how, as I understand it, Lucas wrote all 6 episodes at the same time, made a strategic decision. My guess in part would be that he released these at the height of the last phase of the Cold War. And for anyone who's not familiar with that context, the idea of, I mean, Reagan actually ended up referring to the Soviet Union as the evil empire, whether that was a callback to Star Wars for a pop culture reference or his own term he and his speechwriters developed there. That's probably not a coincidence that Lucas thought it to be more marketable to have the more black and white half of it come out first. And then ironically enough, he released the prequels at a time when America, having won the Cold War, was slipping from that ideological certainty in the Cold War into the 90s. And it came just on the cusp of 9/11, when everything just, that all blew up and everything became, after a short patriotic uber burst, everything became great. And good guys and bad guys in the world were no longer a thing. And it's kind of, I don't think Lucas did that deliberately. He wasn't predicting 9/11 was going to happen. But I think for anyone who thinks that the prequels are not relevant or relatable or something, I mean, literally within 5 years of the prequels coming out, America basically lived that struggle out.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, about strategies among releasing the movies. I do know that there was a lot of doubt in Lucas's mind and some people that were around him as to whether or not the movies would succeed. So ultimately, I believe that he released 4, 5, and 6 first because he thought that that order would be able to make audiences fall for the story. Episode 1 is challenging, and I'll admit, Episode 1 is a movie that I've had to watch a number of times before I really could get a full appreciation for it. I was a lot like some of the critics. I didn't think Episode 1 was all that good. By the time I had watched all of them from start to finish for the first time, I probably would have ranked Episode 1 as my least favorite. But as I've seen them all, probably each of them probably a dozen or more times, at least at this point, Episode 1's my second favorite. So, it's a tougher sell to people. And when you're having doubts about whether your franchise is going to be able to take off or not, you're going to go with the strategy that you feel is going to best push audiences for your franchise. Because you're not just going off of A New Hope. You have a plan to release The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. So you have to think about it in those terms as well. With he's doing it in the order that he did it because he wants. At the time, he wanted to make sure that people would go and see the movies, tell their friends. He wasn't quite sure if Episode 1 was going to be as popular as Episode 4.